is just that is not is it interesting when he goes to the context and knowing felt what he meant to write
Hi, welcome everybody. Hello, welcome. Hello. Welcome to Magers Quinn, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sarah, and I'm a bookseller here. I'm so pleased that you're joining us to celebrate Frank Bures' new book, Pushing the River. A few housekeeping things before we get on with the show tonight. Tonight you will hear from Frank in conversation with Cary J. Griffith. Then there will be a time at the end of the program for audience questions. After Q&A, please allow our authors to move to the signing counter at the front of the bookstore, which is that glass display case that some people have already seen. You may line up there to say hello, chat a bit, and get a signed copy of the book tonight. If you do buy a book here tonight, you're not only supporting our author, but you are also supporting an independently owned bookstore, and we cannot thank you enough. Now, please allow me to introduce our guests. Frank Bures is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in Harper's, Outside, The Atlantic, and many other publications. His stories have been included in the Best American Travel Writing Anthologies. He lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Award-winning author Cary J. Griffith grew up among the woods, fields, and emerald waters of eastern Iowa. His childhood fostered a lifelong love of wild places. He earned a BA in English from the University of Iowa and an MA in Library Science from the University of Minnesota. Griffith's books explore the natural world. In nonfiction, he covers the borderlands between civilization and wild places. In fiction, he focuses on the ways some people use flora and fauna to commit crimes, while others will, with more reverence and understanding of the natural world, leverage their knowledge to bring criminals to justice. He is the recipient of a Minnesota Book Award and a Midwest Book Award. He lives with his family in a suburb of Minnesota's Twin Cities. Please allow me to introduce our guests.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys for coming. This is a really awesome crowd. So many people, there's a lot of people here who are actually in the book. There's my wife and daughter who went down the river with us. There's Moose and this whole crew here who are part of the Guinness World Record team. J.D. Frotsky's here somewhere. Winona Pal, who kind of started off this whole thing with our 2015 trip down the river. And then Jake and Hunter are here too, the two guys who dragged me out of the river a few years ago. So, and of course Anne Regan, my brilliant editor. So I'm just gonna, and so it's great to have everybody here, and it's kind of like, it's kind of what I hope for this book, for it to kind of create a community, and that's what I hope the river kind of does too, is kind of bring people together in a way. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna show some photos, mostly from the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby, and then Cary and I are gonna have some in conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions after that. So I'm just going to run through these kind of quickly. So this book, when I started out, it was started out as kind of a collection of canoeing and outdoor stories, but as Anne and I were kind of working together, it sort of grew into more of a book just about canoeing, which is for the best. It turned out to be a much better book, and so it's got a bunch of stories that I've done about there's a story about the Begami Creek fire, which there were a couple kayakers who got trapped in it, and I did a story about that. I did a bunch of stories about the Guinness World Record attempts on the Mississippi River in 2021 and 2023, including this is our support boat just going on the water in 2021. You can see it's not very far above the water. It didn't last very long.
We were not part of that team. I just want to say.
We did get the record, but not because of that boat. There's stories about our family trip down the river, which was super fun. There's a story a lot of you guys have read, less fun, about my going in the river and meeting Jake and Hunter. But a lot of the book is taken up by stories of the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby, which was a race in the 1940s and 50s. Down the Mississippi, it went from Bemidji to Minneapolis, and it took about 10 days. They would go in stages and race down the river, and then when they got to Minneapolis, it would kick off the Aquatennial. I have one video that I couldn't get in the PowerPoint. This is a video I found in the Historical Society as part of a larger Aquatennial video. This is from the 1942 Derby, and you can see that this race was a huge deal. There would be thousands of people in these little towns coming out to watch when the paddlers came through. They would start out in Bemidji, on the shore of Lake Bemidji there, and go down to Lake Winnebegoshish and Grand Rapids, Aiken, Jacobson, St. Cloud, all the way down the river. They would start out in 1 or 2 minute intervals, and every day the slowest paddlers would start first. The people came in last the next day, and then the fastest paddlers would start second. And so all day, especially the faster paddlers would be trying to catch each other all the way down the river. And so it ended up making for really good racing. And, a lot of the good paddlers, especially in those early days, were Ojibwe paddlers from the Ball Club area, and they all made their own canoes, and it was a really cool race. A lot of the white paddlers were miners and woodsmen, and it was really like a working class affair. And then when they would get to the Twin Cities, they would stop above St. Anthony Falls and truck around to the University Flats, and there would be this big sprint from University Flats to the Franklin Bridge. And when they did that, there would be 10, 20, even like 100,000 people out watching these racers come down the river. So it was a huge deal. There was no major sports teams here yet, and so people had been reading about this race in the paper for 10 days, listening to it on the radio, and so it was just such a huge deal. And then the day they got to the Minneapolis would be like the start of the Aquatennial celebration. So it's cool, and the river here looks like exactly the same as if you'd go down there right now. This is one of 2 films. I have another really short clip that I found. There is another film that exists. It's a 17-minute feature film that Warner Brothers made of the 1946 movie. It's in some library at UCLA, and I tried really hard to get it, but Warner Brothers is not interested in anybody seeing it. So I don't know. They're super not helpful. But anyway, those are some of the races from the 1942 race, and let me see if I can get this. Oh wait, that's right. Back to the PowerPoint. Sorry about this. Little technical difficulties, I guess. Anyway, so the race was a big deal, and And I got a lot of information out of the newspapers. There's really good reporting on a daily basis from every race, but a lot of the best information and best color and best stories came from interviewing a couple, especially one, Bill Smith, the survivor, who was 92 when I went out to talk to him at his house, and his daughter's over here. And Bill Smith, he's a character. He's a really good storyteller, and he raced in 1947 race. That's him with his dad, who was a former professional wrestler, kind of a big drinker, according to Bill. Drank away a lot of their prize money. And this is them training for the 1947 race. This is a picture of Bill and his dad at the start. You can see the Paul Bunyan statue in the background there of the 1947 race. And Bill then also raced in 1949 with Bob Bergstrom, and this is a special canoe I'll tell you about in a little bit. And they ended up finishing in 4th place in that race. And this is his belt buckle that he got for that. And then I also interviewed Stan Droogsma, who's was 91 when I talked to him, and Stan raced in the 1960 race, and he had some great stories about that too. That's Stan when he was in the paper. And then the story, I did a short version of the story for the Minnesota History magazine, and after that came out, I got an email from a guy up in northern Minnesota in Deer River. He said, my dad was in this race, and he's 99, and he still remembers everything, and do you want to talk to him? And so we set up a meeting with Harlow Thompson, who he won the 1951 Derby, and we did a Zoom with Harlow. Harlow was a miner. He and his uncle were miners, and they would get done with their mining shift and go paddle 20 miles on the river and to train for it. And he said it was just for fun, for the challenge of it. I was talking to somebody about it, and he said they just don't make people like that anymore. And Harlow actually passed away just recently, so some of his story. But now, I was really glad to get some of his stories in the book. So the Derby went from 1940 to about 1960, and like I said, when they got to Minneapolis, they did this big sprint. This is from the 1940s. That's Bud and Harry Tibbetts, who are Ojibwe guys from Ball Club. Looks like they're talking some smack to Ace and Ed Eliason. They were in a real fight all the way down the river for first place. And this is the other clip that I have of the final sprint. This is from the 1946 race. And dang it. Okay, maybe not. I don't have a huge amount of PowerPoint experience, you can tell. I'll put that video on afterwards. But anyway, this is the final sprint, right? This is the 1947 race, and this photo was in the paper. This is the actual photo from that race. You can see all the people. Bill Smith and his dad are in there. A whole bunch of people are in there. And that's actually the photo that was used for the cover of the book. And there's the finish of the race. They're all getting out of the water, kind of dodgy ladder. And this is Ray Tibbetts and Bill Evers, who won that race. Ray was a Ojibwe guy from Ball Club. Bill Evers was his brother. They're kissing their $500 that they got, which was a lot of money. And Bill Evers actually he raced in the 1942 race, and he'd never been in a canoe before the start of the race, and ended up finishing like 5th. And I talked to Bill Evers' grandson, and they still have this little canoe that they got for winning that race. The only other thing I wanted to talk about just quickly was when I talked to Bill Smith, he had a great story about he raced in 1947, and then in 1948 he was the support crew for these two guys, Gene Jensen and Tom Estes, who were amazing paddlers, and they lived near each other, and while Bill was kind of waiting for them to come through, he would see all the canoes come through, and there was this one canoe that he kept seeing, and he noticed that it was just like better than the other canoes. He said it like danced on the water, and that was a canoe made by Jim and Bernie Smith. These two guys on the outside there, they were Ojibwe from Ball Club. They made their own canoes, and so after that race, he arranged to buy the canoe, and he entered in the 1949 race, and he and Bob Bergstrom, they did really well. They finished 4th place. And then after the race, Gene Jensen, who lived like a block away from him, came over to his house and was like, I want to look at that boat. Because he could tell it was good too. And he wanted to buy it, but Bill wouldn't sell it. And so he loaned it to him. And Gene took it up to Canada and won the big race up there with it. And then the next year he came back with a canoe that looked a lot like Jim and Bernie Smith's canoe. And just a few more things. There was no derby between 1952 and 1958, but then it came back in 59. And these are just a couple of photos I got from the Roy and Dan Landwehr's family. They raced in that race. They finished 2nd. And these photos were, I'm like 99% sure, were taken by Les Blackhawk, who's a famous Minnesota nature photographer, if you know him. And these guys were really kind of good-looking guys, photogenic, so less than what he was doing, I guess. And that race was won by Harold Thompson, who was Harlow's younger brother. And then the last race was in 1960. That was a huge race. It was super successful. And that was also won by Gene Jensen and Tom Estes. And then that was the last real canoe derby. And then after that, a lot of those guys went on to form the Minnesota Canoe Association, and which drove the racing scene throughout the whole rest of the 20th century, and even till today. So, all right, that's kind of my PowerPoint. We'll chat a little bit here, and then we can do questions if anybody has them.
Sounds good. That one thing I would say that you touched on a little bit in there, but the prize money was really significant, was it? I mean,
yeah, it was. I did all the calculations, and it was like, it would be like $20,000 or between $20,000 and $30,000 for first place. I mean, it was a lot of money. So these guys could afford to like build a canoe and buy their canoe, and then they would win this race, and then they would go to Thunder Bay and win another $1,000, and it was good money in those days.
yeah, you showed the $500, but was that worth like 5,000?
No, more than that. I can't remember the exact. I have the numbers in the book, but it would be like maybe like 15 or 20 or something like that.
Yeah, it was a really big deal. I didn't know anything about canoe derby races before this, but I have a couple other questions, most of which you answered in your presentation, but I'll ad lib. One thing I want to say though is huge thanks to Magers and Quinn. We love our independent booksellers. We are so rich with great independent bookstores. I've been to them all over the state. We're really blessed in Minnesota. So it's great to see a crowd like this come out for Frank's book. Frank, you have a lot of relatives, a lot of fans.
Yeah.
It's good to see your wife and one of your daughters here who endured. That's a great part of the book, that story.
Yes.
A couple of different stories about your family going down. But I would be remiss if we didn't mention one of the great all-time book people in Minnesota. I kidded her and said it was going to be a roast. Anne Regan is here. Recently retired from the Minnesota Historical Society Press. She's been there 45 years. She bought acquired 350 books from various authors all over. She helped me with 2 of my books. Huge help to me, and I know she did. You I think were the second to the last, or the last
Yeah,
book.
something like
The
that.
last.
The last.
The last in.
Yeah.
And she did such a phenomenal job of it, and I don't know if you have any stories about working with Anne.
Only good ones.
Those are boring.
No, Anne was great. Anne really helped shape it and really cut some stuff that needed to be cut and helped kind of push it in the direction that it needed to go. So yeah, it was really great working with it.
If I could just say, you both were wonderful to work with. When you get a chance to work with an author like Jack Elhai here, who writes really well, has all the organization put up, and it just is, you just a little trim here, a little polish there, and then they listen to what you say, and they answer your phone calls and your emails. It's perfect. So I'm thrilled to see both of you speaking together. Thank you.
Thank you. I will say, the other day we met at a coffee shop and we were talking, and his comment after as I was walking out of the coffee shop, she said, the only thing Anne said to me was, thanks for taking all my edits. And I thought, that's exactly what she said to me. So it was huge. She just recently won the 2025 K Sexton Award for Literary Achievement. Minnesota Book Award presentations on April 22nd, I think. Congratulations. I'm really curious when I run into people like you, and you allude to some of this in the book, but what did you grew up in Winona. You want to tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up on the river and what you did?
Well, I mean, yeah, Winona was a good place to grow up. You know, it's a little rough around the edges, but yeah, we did a lot of playing in the river. There was a rope swing we would go over to and swing off of. In high school, even, you know, we did a lot of swimming at Latch Island, a lot of boating on the river, fishing, all that kind of stuff. And also being from Winona, you know, I was in Boy Scouts, and we had Mike Chickanowski, who founded Winona Canoe, was one of the guys who would come and help our Boy Scout troop and show us how to paddle and all that stuff. And I grew up with his daughters too, who were also big canoers as well. So I don't remember anything he told me, but.
And you did a lot of camping and paddling on the river.
Yeah, camping, running around the hills, you know, biking, yeah, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the canoe derby. First half of the book is all about the canoe derbies, but it's written in a way that makes it really dramatic and interesting. But I really love the second half, in which you talk about the trips that you took with your family. That really compelling, that I have a few questions about. Dead Cold, that was where you almost lost, thanks to Jake, and who was the other one? Hunter, yes, thank you, you guys. I think the moral of that story is find out when they're going on the river. But one of the things I was really blown away by was the amount of research. You alluded to a little of this in, you know, finding Bill Smith and some of the others that you talked to, but there is a ton of newspaper research and other probably newsletters and all sorts of materials. You want to talk a little bit about that? What that involved?
Yeah, so like everybody kind of knew about the St. Paul Indian Canoe Derby, but nobody could really tell you anything about it. Even the people whose, you know, kids of the people who were in it. I think I see another one here. You know, didn't know that much about it. Like when I I think, did I mention when I talked to Harlow Thompson and his dad was on the Zoom too, he said he learned more about the canoe derby in the last hour than he had in the last 70 years. You know, those guys didn't just talk a lot about that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the stuff was gone. And so I went through the newspapers. The Historical Society has a really awesome Historic Star Tribune news archive. And was able, and it's searchable by keywords. You can go through year by year and search for like canoe derby and find all the stories that have the canoe derby in it. And so I was able to kind of go. I mean, that ends up being a lot of articles. Like I think it was like 643 articles or something like that. But you can reconstruct every year and find out what happened when, who was ahead, and all this stuff. And so there was a lot of stuff there. It was hard to sort, kind of difficult to sort through it all and keep it all straight. But that was kind of the process, and then finding whatever else I could, like talking to the guys who are still around, and I talked to Roy Landor's wife too about what she remembered, and well, that was after the fact. But you know, just like trying to find anybody who knew anything about it, and also Lila Crow at the Historical Society in like Itasca County. She sent me a bunch of obituaries and stuff for all the people who were in it, and so I was able to get a lot of great information from those too.
Yeah, when you can glean from that process. That is a painstaking process, a real labor of love. So kudos to you for doing all that. I mean, weeding through 690 articles to pull out, and some of those, I know, I've done that kind of research. Sometimes you get advertisements and all kinds of dross in there that before you get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and also looking for those little details that like make it come alive, that are actually interesting. You know.
Yeah, and you did a really nice job. Really good dramatic handling of the whole thing.
Thank you.
You know, I'm curious too about the structure. Did that first half was all about the derby. The second half, how did that all come about? Did you feel like you just didn't have enough for the derby section, and so you started?
No, I mean a lot of those stories I had already done, and so they were pre-existing, and so that section is kind of an anthology, except for a few pieces that are original. So. And I had originally, like I said, thought of it as a collection of stories a lot of which I had already done, but I wanted to have this one extra piece about the history of canoeing and that canoe culture and stuff, and that ended up being about the derby, and then that just like grew into this monster thing that it just made sense to break it into chapters and try to make it read like a race, you know. So it just kind of evolved, right? I mean. From what we first talked about, Ann and I, to what it ended up being, but I think it landed in a good place.
Yeah, I do too, definitely. Dead Cold. He has this really compelling chapter called Dead Cold about a true life experience that was involving him. And when I read this, I was struck with a lot of things. I was struck with the drama of the moment. You almost died. But I was also struck with how easily that could happen to just about anybody. And I've written books about, I wrote a book about survival instances. That was the first one I worked on with Ann. And, you know, there, but for the grace of God go I mean, there were so many instances, especially in your story, where things can just go wrong that are totally unintended. He's an excellent swimmer. He's an excellent paddler. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, not only that could go wrong, but that do go wrong every year. You know, I look at the papers and see, you know, people who fall out of their boats in the spring and who didn't wear their life jackets or something. Even if they did wear their life jackets, I mean, the cold water is something that people, including myself, just don't think about as a danger. And you know, it is. You can really easily get into a bad situation fast, especially in the boundary waters. In the spring or fall, you know, the water's super cold up there, and so, you know, it just is one of those things where you're just like one minute you're just living your life, and then the next minute you're like looking at the end of it. You know, I had read the story To Build a Fire. I don't know if you guys know that one, by Jack London, which is about a guy who makes a bunch of small mistakes. I mean, he was kind of asking for it, but you know, it's just how those little mistakes kind of compound and build up to this like moment you can't come back from, and that was what I kind of felt like. You know, like you just sort of spend a lot of time in the next few weeks like looking over every decision, like if I would have done this, if I would have done this, if I would have done this, you know, and it's just, you're just on this knife edge of how everything could have gone another way.
Yeah.
So just, you know, that was what I would say is just be careful and be respectful of the cool water.
And find Hunter and Jake.
Yeah, and then call Hunter and Jake and see when they're going up paddling.
Which was really an unusual part of the story, because it was very early in the morning, very early in the season. I think the water temperature was 42.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
these guys would even be out there was.
No, it was really random and very strange. And you know, it was 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and March 28th or 9th or something like that. And there's usually nobody out there, period. But at that time, like for somebody to be out there, it's just like really crazy luck.
Bridget, you let him go out there?
She didn't know where it was.
I was asleep in bed.
Anyway, very compelling story. I'll have to conclude with one other thing. There's another compelling story in there about that weird experience the guy had up in the North Woods.
Oh, in
Hunting with the.
yeah, that was
Something quite
that was a
different.
part of an assignment I did for the Minneapolis Star Tribune for Halloween. I was looking for weird outdoor stories, and I kept hearing about this place in the Quetico called Sturgeon Narrows. Like a lot of people have weird stories about it. I heard like multiple strange things happening there. But there was just one kind of legendary story by this guy, Attila DeBasi, he's an artist over in St. Paul, and he was a camper, and he was on a trip up there, and he and another kid were in their tent, and they were camping at the Sturgeon Narrows, and they just started to hear this like thumping in the distance, and it just got like louder and louder and louder until it was just like this storm around them, and they thought it was somehow the other guys in the tent, and then they yelled at them, and then it stopped, and then it was like silent, and then they started to hear voices, and he thought it was like speaking French or something, and it sounded like people were coming across the water, and then it like started up again, all this noise and stuff, and then they ran over into the other tent, and as soon as they left the tent, it was quiet again, and it was just a really strange story that they don't know how to make sense of. But you know, I tracked down the other guy, and they hadn't talked since they were 12, and he lives in Wisconsin. He's an economist, and he told me basically the same exact story. So it's just a
Really,
weird place.
they stuck to their story.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, this is a pretty enthralling story, which is really different. Kind of makes you think about the supernatural, and the French with the voyagers were up with the ghosts of the voyagers.
Yeah.
Kind of. For the writers in the audience, do you have a particular practice that you use when you write? Do you write every day? Do you write in the kitchen all the time?
Yeah, you just see your deadlines coming and panic.
Good advice for the writers. Okay.
It's not a joke, actually.
This is sort of a way to get to know Frank a little bit better. I give him 10 quick questions. He responds real quickly. It's kind of a lightning round. And we get a sense of who he is, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. What are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading Lonesome Dove, Son of the Morning Star, River Journey by Clarence Jonk. It's a really cool book. A lot of books. I just read Jess Walter's So Far Gone, which has just come out, which is really good. And a bunch of other stuff you don't want to hear about.
Do you prefer dogs or cats?
I like dogs, but we're a cat family. We have 3 cats. We've had 4 cats. We have a lot of cats. Cats are easier.
Okay. What was your favorite vacation and why?
We've been to Mexico City and the Yucatan Peninsula a few times. That's probably my favorite. I don't know. I don't vacation very well. My vacation is my favorite kind of travel is going to places that are really difficult, like Nigeria.
No, it wasn't the paddle down the river with your family?
Oh yeah, that was fantastic. Top 3. Yes. No, that was. You're right. That was fun. Yes, that was a great trip. It wasn't a vacation.
Just a few others. If you were on a desert isle and could only have 3 books, which ones would you choose?
Well, I'd probably pick Lord of the Rings, because technically it's one book. You can take all 3. Probably Homer's The Odyssey, and the last one would be probably Pushing the River. It's like so good, you could just keep reading it over and over.
Okay, you gotta buy this book. If your house was burning down and you could save one inanimate thing, what would it be?
Probably a cat.
Inanimate.
I know, they just sit there.
It's true. Cats are kind of like that. Do you prefer Winona or the cities?
Oh, that's a trick question. I mean, I'm here, aren't I? No, I don't know. Winona's great. I did get kind of in trouble. I wrote a story for Bicycling about biking to my 20th reunion, and I kind of badmouthed Winona a little bit. And at the I heard about it at the 25th reunion. So it's a rough like river town. It's got some dark stuff going on.
I've never heard Winona referred to as rough, but you've done it a couple of times here. I'll have to get down there.
Yeah, you got to go to the bars.
Okay, I think the scariest thing that ever happened to you, you chronicled in Dead Cold. What was the second scariest thing that ever happened to you?
Yeah, so after that happened, I kind of made a list, and there's a few. I had probably the closest when I was in high school, we were climbing up Sugarloaf, which is a big rock thing in Winona on the bluff, and we were about 2/3 of the way up, and I tried to pull myself up, and the rock broke off, and I fell back down onto the rock that I was standing on, and this big rock, I somehow pushed it off to the side, and it hit the ground, and the guy I was climbing with thought it was me that hit the ground when he heard it, because it made such a big noise. So that was pretty close. And then I had my appendix out in Tanzania. That was kind of close. There was one time we were in a sort of a mob situation in Nigeria. Like our car was surrounded by this mob in a taxi park, and it was just at that point where it was almost gonna go off, but it didn't. But that felt a little close to the edge. And I've been near weirdly a lot of trees that fell down. Three within it's not very far away.
You think along with Dead Cold they're trying to tell you?
That's kind of what it feels like. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, there's a few. And then on our Mississippi trip, when I was on the support crew, which is in the book, we had quite a few close calls. We hit a buoy going full speed in the middle of the night with our pontoon. We almost lost it there. This is a mistake. This is an embarrassing mistake, but tried to anchor off the back too, and the boat almost went under a couple times. Stuff like that. Not Moose's crew. Moose runs a good crew. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's been a few.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
And I really do recommend this book.
Yeah, if there's any questions, we can take questions. Yeah.
Who put up the prize money?
It would have been the city, and Yeah, probably the city of Minneapolis or like the Aquatennial Committee or something like that. They would raise money and have sponsors, and I think that's where it came from. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and then they would have sponsors for each team and stuff, and then they'd have prize money. Sometimes they'd have prize money for the stages too. So like every stage, like you could win like outboard motors or like $50 or something like that. So yeah, there was quite a bit of money. I'm not 100% sure where it came from, but I think from the Aquatennial Committee somehow.
Why did it stop in the 60s?
It's really unclear reading the stuff. It in 1961 it was handed off to the Boy Scouts, and they sort of took it over and they did it as a different kind of race where they would race in teams for a little bit and switch. But it just wasn't the same, and nobody really cared about it, and it went on for about 4 years, and then it died. But I couldn't find any good explanation for why. It was expensive. It costs a lot of money if you look at the budget line items and stuff. And they would fly like 50 city officials up to Bemidji for the start, and so it was, maybe got kind of top heavy. I don't know, but yeah, for whatever I'm not 100% sure why it stopped. Yeah.
Well, this is kind of a related question. It's not directly from your book, but so I'm very curious that this race sort of launched Aquatennial, and I'm someone who hasn't lived in Minneapolis all that long, and I can't figure out where Aquatennial has anything to do with water anymore. And do you have a sense of like how that started?
No. The question is what does the Aquatennial have to do with water anymore? And I don't really know actually myself. I haven't been for like a long time. And, it's sort of a shadow of its former self. I also am a big rock skipper. I was kind of thinking of trying to revive, like, do a rock skipping competition as part of the Aquatennial.
You were a world record rock skipper.
Not world record, but like I did participate in the World Rock Skipping Championship. It's an amateur division.
What makes a great rock skipper? Because I think I'm pretty good, but maybe not world champion.
We'll have to take this out to the river. That's a long discussion.
Oh, yeah, I never even knew they had this.
Yeah, it's on Mackinac Island on July 4th. Yeah.
And there's a YouTube video
Oh yeah.
that may answer some of your questions. Because this is a story that, I shouldn't admit it, but did not make the final cut. And it's really good. And it's really interesting. That YouTube video is really good too.
You
Yeah,
cut
there's
the rock skipping story?
Yeah, if you Google 88 skips, it'll come up. It's Kurt Steiner's video of his current. It's still a current world record skip. It's amazing skip. Yeah, with a video, and they've got tracks you can count, and it's a long skip. Yeah. Jeff.
Where do I find next?
Good question. I was looking at some rivers. I'd like to do Kettle River. That'd be a good one. Kettle River, Zumbro River. I don't know. I kind of want to do some of those smaller rivers. Yeah.
I'm really excited about your book, and you're on the river a lot. But I think it's fair to say a lot of us, we just drive over it most of the time. That's our relation with the river a lot of the time. What would you think? What would you wish or invite us to think about when we drive over the river?
Good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's been a long process of like when I was growing up, the river was not really considered an asset, in Winona or any other river towns, and it was just kind of a big sewer where you threw stuff. And in the last like 30 years, it's really turned around and it's cleaned up, and people have started to value it again, like, and build parks on it and stuff. So, I don't know. I mean, you could think there's a lot of things you could think about the history, and I mean, it's like one of the most famous rivers in the world, and it's just got so much. Yeah, it's just it's a flyway for like 40% of the North American birds, and yeah, it's just a rich area. Yeah. Anybody else?
So, quick question, they had the race, how long did it take? I mean, was it days or?
Yeah, it would take about 10 days. They would do it, you know, they would stop in the towns and sleep and then start the next morning. The total times would be like 50, 60, 70 hours
Okay.
of paddling. And there's a guy we know, Scott Miller, who runs the races on the river right now, who is kind of considering starting it up again as a race from Itasca even to Minneapolis, and he would run it expedition style, I think, so you would just go straight through instead of stages. So then I guess we'll find out how long it really takes.
Yeah, did they ever talk about bad weather or anything like that there?
Yeah, there's bad weather. Yeah, there's places where they had to get off the river. They were off the river, and there's lightning. Nobody ever died, but a lot of people tipped over in Lake, especially Lake Winnipegoshish, and had to wait to get fished out or just were out of the race. And there was one race. There was actually an earlier race in 1919 from. It was the first, I think, canoe marathon from Minneapolis to Winona. And there was, at that point, there was no dam, so you could just go straight through. And they went through the night, and they had a big storm on Lake Pepin in the middle of the night, and a bunch of people tipped over and somehow got back in their canoes and finished. But yeah, there's always weather out there when you're on the river. Yeah.
Best I can tell, nobody ever had life jackets.
No, I don't think they did. I think they may have had them in the boats, but nobody wore them. Yeah, there's not a single life jacket worn in any of the photos. Yeah, it's really amazing that nobody died. Yeah, JD.
Frank, have you ever paddled the river in the southern states? The southern leg of the river?
No, I haven't. I was on the support crew, so we were like on the support boat while the paddlers were going down in 2021, and Moose has been down there. These guys have been down there a couple times. That river down there is really interesting. I thought it'd be more industrial and stuff, but when, like in Mississippi, it's super wild because they have these dikes and it's all a flood zone, so you can't build anything, and it just feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. It's just this massive wilderness. There are these huge sand islands and stuff, and it gets industrial when you get down to like Baton Rouge, but that whole middle section Mississippi area is like super wild, and it's big. It's like a mile across.
Yeah.
The whole way. Yeah, Moose.
What are you working on now, Frank, or what's next?
I have some stories. I'm doing a story for Men's Health about an ultra runner who set the record in the Leadville 100-mile this last year. I do a bunch of audio tours, and I just had a new audio tour out in the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden, if anybody's interested. I have another book idea that I'm kind of working on about group stories. It's nothing related to canoeing. It's more related to. I did another book about magical genital theft a few years ago, and it's more closely related to that. So it kind of runs the gamut. Yeah, Peter.
Those custom canoes you talked about, those sort of prized to people that came in first or second, or are those still around?
No, I don't think any of them are around. Like Tom Landver, you said that their canoe got stolen out of that back. Roy and Dan's canoe got stolen. Bill Smith's canoe got stolen out of his cabin. There is one canoe that the guys from Mankato had that is still around. I think it might be in the possession of the Ely, Minnesota Canoe Museum, but I haven't been able to track it down yet. But so there, it's possible there's one, but that's the only one I know of that is still around. Unless the Jensen family might have some. I don't know. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Were there, I presume the answer is no, but were there any women that wanted to be in this race, or were there any women that were?
There were two women who completed completed the Derby. One, she and her husband finished in the first one in 1940, and then the other woman who finished was in 1949, and she was kind of a character. She was always in the paper. She was like 43 years old. She was a grandma. She was complaining because she wasn't losing weight and stuff. And, she was really funny, and but she made it. And there's one day when she was like 43rd place, and she's 43 years old, and she's in canoe number 43 also. So that was a big news day for her.
Were there any moments when you were researching this, or just specifically the race part, where there was just like this one detail that pops out to you, or this one little anecdote that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just found this thing?
Yeah, not as much in the papers, but mostly probably when I was talking to Bill Smith, because his story about getting rescued on Lake Winnebagoshus by Jesse Tibbetts, who is a Ojibwe paddler and like coach, and how they were just sitting out in the middle of the lake and didn't know what to do, and then Jesse Tibbetts came along in his boat and emptied him out and sent him on their way, and also his stories about getting the paddles from in 1949, I think he broke 2 paddles on Lake Bemidji, like before they even got out of the gate, basically. And then Jim and Bernie Smith like threw him a paddle, and he used that for the rest of the race. And so those were kind of details that I loved, or like talking to Harlow Thompson about being a miner. And he said, Harlow actually, I didn't put this in the book, but he said that you always knew when you were behind Jim and Bernie Smith because they drank Coke cans all the time. Coke, and there'd be Coke cans floating in the room. So, stuff like that. I don't know. I love those kind of details. Yeah. Yeah, Jake.
What was different about those boats? You said they noticed they were floating down.
Well, so they were all using wooden canvas boats, and that particular year, they were experimenting with V-bottom canoes, because everybody thought those were faster, and Jim and Bernie Smith won, Gene Jensen and Tom Estes won with a V-bottom, but it was only because they were in super good shape. They like rigged up this kind of gym in their garage with like greased pulleys and stuff, and so they would work out like all winter and be like in super good shape, and so they won in spite of the V-bottom. But then the next year, everybody came back with V-bottom canoes because they thought they were faster. And Jim and Bernie Smith had a more round bottom canoe, and it turns out that's the better canoe for that kind of rain. Because if you get a V-bottom in shallow water, you just basically stop, And so the round bottom is better. And there's something about it too that was real tippy. You had to be paddling like super evenly. Like Bill said, they spent more time swimming than paddling, because they, if you miss your stroke, or you hit the wrong beat or something like that, you'll go right over. So it's like a fine balance. It's like probably low in the water and round bottom. And I'm not exactly sure. We don't really have those canoes to look at them anymore, but it's something along those lines. All right. Should we do one more question? Yeah.
So, what do you paddle?
Well, we have this. I have a Winona Vagabond. It's a little solo Kevlar canoe. I have a Menards kayak that I paddle that I got in a doorbuster once for like $80. It works pretty good. And then we have an old Grumman that is like a tank that washed up on my grandma's across a creek from my grandma's house on the Minnehaha, and we still use that. It's still good. We took it to the Boundary Waters a few years ago. It's kind of heavy on the portages, but you can't beat it. I mean, that thing will go forever.
Sticks to the rocks.
Yeah, it does stick to the rock. Yeah. All right. Should we do any more? All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. It's really fun, and we'll be.